And I'm live. Greetings and welcome to Act One, a Canadian take on news events. Oh my goodness. I see many of the what I'll call the usual suspects are already here. Don't you love my new wardrobe? I'm wearing my old army fleece underneath my whatever cardigan. I don't know what you call this, underneath my shirt. Um, Little bit of a personal note. Yesterday, our furnace went on the fritz, and the house got down to 9 degrees before it finally had a got serviced. It turned out the igniter switch was faulty, wasn't working, and thankfully, nothing major, nothing massive, but it was cold in this house last night, and this morning, and so I put on my old army fleece and my old army long johns. Anyway, uh, you're watching Act One, Canadian take on news events. I'm Gordy Canuck. I'm the host, host, writer, producer, chief cook, and bottle washer. Um, on what I like to say is, your most raw, bare bones, basic YouTube channel that you're going to find. I've got John 5 is here. Danny Copeman is here. Danny's moderating tonight, which he does almost every night, along with username Eat Me, whose real name is Nancy. She moderates as well. But whale oil beef from out in British Columbia is here, and there are some others. If you haven't chimed in yet in the live chat, you're most welcome. If you're new, introduce yourself. Let us know where you're from, broadly or as narrowly or broadly as you want. Uh, John is writing with respect to the topic of tonight's conversation, talking, bye bye to the boomers. John is writing, the baby boomers are healthy and live longer compared to Gen Y and Gen Z. Or if you're an American, Gen Z. Canadians, we speak, I don't mean this pejoratively, I don't mean this negatively, but Canadians, we speak English. Americans speak American. And so in the English language, Z is the last letter of the alphabet, but in American English, everyone knows Z. And a lot of Canadians now say Z. I'm old. I'm proud and 60. So um, Danny's writing, good evening to everyone. I love Danny always puts the praying hands across and his cup of coffee. And he always puts down that Jesus is Lord and King. Amen, brother. Uh, and then Danny goes on to say, don't forget Gen X, John 5, the relentless, feral, least heard, at least, and least seen generation. At least that's how our parents wanted it. Yeah, get out of the house when I was growing up. It's a beautiful day outside. I don't want to see you again until lunch or until dinner. And then after dinner, I don't want to see you until the street lights come on. What a great time to be alive. But my parents weren't boomers. And Wales saying, raised in the Pepsi generation. Everyone saying hi to each other. Let's see. Uh, and Danny's asking, actually, I was talking about that with Chris. I'm lucky. I have a neighbor who works in HVAC. As a matter of fact, he installed the furnace that we have. And so I was able to rely upon him to fix it. So it saved me quite a few bucks. Probably, I just paid him in cash. You know the way it works. And Danny's asking if when I was trying to, when I was tinkering with my furnace, did I make like the guy in A Christmas Story, the father in A Christmas Story, who my father worked in profanities like Rembrandt worked on paintings, like Rembrandt used oil. It was his true medium. Uh, and as it turned out, Chris, who was fixing the furnace, had never seen the movie A Christmas Story, you'll shoot your eye out with Ralphie desperately trying to get a BB gun, a Red Ryder BB gun. Then we have Danny saying bonsoir to Eat Me, I'm assuming, who is here. She has said that she's doing some cooking or something. She's doing something in the kitchen, but she's going to be watching. So if we do get spammed tonight, Danny, you're the man. Uh, Everyone's saying hi, and so let's get right down to it. The Boomer generation. But before I do, the usual reminder to like, share, and subscribe to the content. It's tough on a YouTube channel such as my own. No production values, very bare bones, basic. I don't engage with any of the AI tools that they tell you are vital if you want to grow your channel. You can't grow your channel without AI. That seems to be the message. Well, I'm going to try. And I also often go counter narrative on this channel. The what the tech companies like Google, what they are promoting, I when they're saying go, when they say to go right, quite often on this channel I'm going left, and as a result of that, my content, I doubt, is going to be amplified. But hey, it is what it is. So if you like the content, share, subscribe, hit the like button, and away we go. The baby boomer generation, we got to define that firstly. And most individuals who study demographics, the study of human populations, place it's pretty much universal the start. The post war baby boom is said to have started in 1946. Young men coming back from war, from the end of World War II, coming home in an era without a birth control pill, without, if you were engaging in marital relations, very good chance you were having kids. Condoms, most will know, are not that reliable. And so uh, we had this massive explosion in children being born. Now, so it started in 1946. There's no universal end date, although the most common one I see is 1964. So it's almost a 20-year window. It's an 18-year window. Anyone born from 1946 to 1964 is considered to be part of the baby boom generation. However, I should note that I have seen those who study demographics push it to 1966, which is the year that I was born. I do not consider myself to be a baby boomer. However, if I am, I'm on the very tail end of it. But I most commonly am identified as being kind of the front end of Gen X. And as I say, my parents were not born in the baby boom generation. My mother and father were born in 1937 and 1938. So they were born before the war started, and then enough said. Uh, I'm just trying to catch up on the messages while I go. Uh, and Danny's putting down the year is 1946, 1964. That's the most commonly accepted parameters for the baby boom generation. So what that means is, and that's what I'm going to run with, 1946, 1964. So what that means is that the front end of the baby boom generation is now moving into their 80s. That means that they're moving into the end of what can be considered natural life expectancy. There are two ways that they calculate average life. There's average, how long does the average Canadian live? And it's somewhere around 81, 82 years of age. That is from birth. Okay. However, that will include children who die for various reasons, be it health related accidents, whatever. But Most Canadians, though, alive now will live to be somewhere in and around 85. So either way you slice it, whether you take it as 82 or 85, the the baby boom generation is moving into their end of life. And in the description to this video, I describe the baby boom generation as a ravaging horde of locusts that basically have consumed everything in their path. And I know that many who are not of the baby boomer generation, there was a T-shirt at one time. It said "Die Yuppie Scum." As a matter of fact, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers had a an album, a song. They had a song, and that was the first time I saw that T-shirt was by either Tom Petty himself or someone in the band, and they had this "Die Yuppie Scum" T-shirt, and I loved it because I always had a bit of a hate on, and that's a bad way to put it, but I did not like the boomer generation. I find them to be so incredibly egocentric. Um, Sorry, I'm doing this off the fly as I always do on my videos, so sometimes my thoughts escape me, stream of consciousness. Um, but that song was "You're So Bad," I think it is. It went, "My sister got lucky, married a yuppie, took him for all he was worth. Now she's a swinger, dating a singer. I don't know which one is worse. Ah, but not me, baby. I've got you to save me. Ah, you're so bad. Best thing I ever had in a world gone mad. You're so bad." Welcome to my channel. I do this from time to time. Remember old songs and I sing a few bars. Thanks for putting up with it. I know I don't have a great singing voice, but at any rate, yuppie. There was an acronym, or an acronym affixed to the boomer generation, and it stood for young urban professional, upwardly mobile. And you talk about the way this world has changed. And I wanted to take a walk through as the baby boomers aged and how they impacted the world, Canada, the United States, the Western world. And so when boomers started to get their driver's license, so we're talking about the 1960s into the early 70s here, boomers start to drive. Because remember, the front end is 1946, but the back end, doesn't you've got an 18-year window there. And so as we move it into the late, into the 60s and the 70s, car ownership explodes. We get the VW Bug, cheap transportation, because boomers can't afford much. They're kids at this juncture, and they can't afford much for their cars, and they can't afford much in the way of maintenance and gas. So you get the emergence of the VW Bug, or better, I think the proper name is the Beetle, but everyone called them bugs, punch buggies. And what happened shortly thereafter in the very early 70s, I think we're talking 72, 73. So just as boomers are starting to driving, we had what was called the oil embargo. At that time, I was living as an expatriate Canadian in Glen Rock, New Jersey. I was a kid during what they referred to in the United States as the energy crisis, and you had gasoline rationing. In my state that I was living in, New Jersey, they had three flags. A gas station would have a yellow flag, a red flag, or a green flag. And green flags were hard to find. And a green flag meant you could buy as much gas as you wanted. Yellow flag meant that you were limited to a certain dollar amount. And I believe a red flag meant they were out of gas entirely. And what had happened is OPEC, the cartel of oil producing nations, basically shut the tap off to elevate prices, and there was gas rationing. Because we were Canadian family living in New Jersey, we had to make a trip to Toronto to go to the embassy or to go to the consulate, something like that. We had to update our paperwork. And so we had to make a trip back to Canada to do this paperwork. And so we came up to Toronto. I remember staying at the King Edward Hotel, right downtown Toronto. And when we came back, my father, we had to stay an extra day in Toronto because the state of New York had what they called odd even rationing. And what that meant is you could only buy gas. If your license plate ended with an even number, you could buy gas on an even number day. If it was odd, you had to buy an odd number day. And so, because we couldn't get through in our 19, oh gosh, my dad's old station wagon, Ford LTD station wagon with wood paneling. In order to make it through New York State, we couldn't do it on one tank of gas. And so we had to stay in Toronto for one extra day until the calendar lined up with the last digit of the license plate. Craziness. So that was one aspect of the boomers. They affected the car market, they affected the world energy markets. And then Danny saying that he got his license 1987, age 14 in Alberta. And he paid, and gasoline back then in Canada was 37 cents a liter. And there's right around 5 liters per US gallon. And you're talking about the fact that speed limit, Wales saying that speed limits were reduced to 80 kilometers per hour in the 70s to save gas. You travel at a slower rate. Same thing they did in the US with the 55 mile an hour speed limit. Much of it was predicated on garnering better fuel economy which all started with the energy crisis. But then we move into the 80s, and now we moved back permanently to Canada in 1978. And in the early 80s, in a city like Toronto, the vacancy rate in the housing market, in the rental accommodation market, renting an apartment was damn near impossible. The vacancy rate was effectively zero. It was like 0.1%. Finding an apartment was incredibly difficult because all the boomers were moving out of their parents' houses. They were looking for rental accommodation. All of a sudden, there wasn't an apartment to be found. And that was back in the days of rent control. And a new industry came up, and they were called apartment brokers. And what would happen if I had an apartment and my company or wherever I worked, if I was moving for whatever reason, if I was going to be vacating my apartment, it's under rent control. There were ads in the paper for get in touch with a apartment broker, and you can get $300, $400, $500 from a broker and to transfer your lease over to a new individual. And then what the apartment broker would do is you would pay the existing leaseholder $500, and then now he's got an apartment. I have an apartment available. It'll cost you $1,000 as a brokerage fee, and then we'll transfer the lease from the existing leaseholder to you. And as I understand it, it was an illegal practice, but it went on. And so, we had boomers impacted the transportation market, cars and gasoline prices and oil embargo. And then bang, they flood the rental housing market and supply goes down to nothing. And then as we moved on into the 80s, as boomers started to accumulate some wealth, they started to head into the housing market. And what that meant was all of a sudden you have banks and other lending institutions that are offering mortgages. And mortgage financing is subject to the same laws of supply and demand as anything else. And so what happened is you had all these boomers going into the capital markets at the same time, needing mortgage financing. The demand for mortgage financing went way up, and the banks started raising their interest rates. And the central banks, all of a sudden, money became very expensive. And interest rates of 16, 18, even 20 plus percent were not uncommon. And back in that era, talking late 80s, mid to late 80s, what happened was people stopped buying more or houses, they started buying mortgages. Because if someone had an existing mortgage that was pegged at 12% when the market rate is 18, 19, 20, the mortgage could be transferred from the person selling to the house to the person buying the house. And that would be a selling point of a listing is mortgage finance transfer of mortgage available at 12.5%. And that house would have bidders because, oh, I can afford a 12.5% mortgage. I can't afford 18, 19, 20. So another huge impact. And then the boomers, as they started to pay off their houses and they started to accumulate wealth, then they started to invest. They started to put their money in the bank. They started to take out term deposits. They started to take out GICs, guaranteed investment certificates. And banks back in the late 70s, early 80s, you were getting 10% or more on your deposits. Imagine that, a bank paying you interest. That's because capital was in demand because the boomers were all borrowing. But now that the boomers now had wealth and wanted a return on it, then the banks sent interest rates crashing down. And now all of a sudden, their parents who had been getting 10 or more, now they were getting 2 and 3%. And this is garbage. And what did they do? Boomers started to invest. They flooded into the stock market. And what happened? We had a bubble. As we moved through the 90s, so we went from the 70s, cars, late 70s, early 80s, into the rental accommodation market, like this ravaging horde of locusts. And then they move into the housing market, and mortgage financing rates go through the roof because the locusts are swarming up all the available borrowable money, all the money that can be borrowed, they're swallowing it up. And then when they have money and they start putting in the banks, then interest rates tanked. So the boomers moved and they started investing in the stock market. A book came out by Chilton, I think is the name of the author, Canadian author. The Wealthy Barber talked about investing in mutual funds, MUT funds, and everyone started to get into the stock market. And eventually, MUT funds, mutual funds, are kind of boring, and people started to invest in individual stocks. And then we had the tech bubble, and companies like Nortel that never made a dime of profit. Just every time they needed money, they just printed more shares and sold them into the market. And everyone, picked up a phone. Wow, this Nortel is going to be huge. They make switches, and this is the new digital economy. Oh, you got to be invested in Nortel. And it went to 100, 120, 140, 180. I think it peaked at about 180. I might be wrong. But an analyst came out and predicted that it was going to go as high as 260. And so there were people sitting on seven figures. There were people with $1 million portfolios on paper, but they didn't cash out because why would I sell for 180? This analyst says it's going to 260. You can guess it never went to 260. It actually it went to zero. It went to zero. The tech bubble was exactly that. It was a bubble. It was built on hot air. And there's a famous quote from the stock market crash of 1929, where I think it was John Paul Getty, very wealthy American who was asked. He apparently, if I'm remembering the story right, sold his investments. He got out of the stock market just months or weeks before it all crashed, and someone asked him how he got so rich, and he said, "I always got out too soon." And he said the story, what really triggered it was when a kid who was shining his shoes started giving him stock tips. He had some kid shining his shoes, telling him, "Oh, you got to buy DuPont, you got to buy this, that, or the other." And he realized maybe it's time to get out of the market. A lot of people didn't. The stock market absolutely cratered in around 2000. The boomers have just moved through like ravaging locusts, consuming everything in their wake. And now, as they enter their 80s, what do we have? We have our healthcare system is breaking, and they always knew this was going to happen. I saw the predictions as recently as I saw predictions of it back in the 80s and 90s saying that when the baby boomers start to reach their 60s, 70s, 80s, when they start turning into their 60s, that's when people start accessing healthcare more and more. And we need to expand the healthcare system. We need to invest, but the political class always said we're driving efficiencies in the healthcare sector. And that's just political speak for we're going to have them do more with less. There would be annual increases in funding, but it wasn't even keeping up with inflation. So let's see what's being written in the chat. Um, I see. I'm not going to go all the way back to speed limits and stuff like that. Leave that be. Um, and talking about how Danny is saying that highways in Alberta were 110 kilometers when I grew up there. Now it's 120. Um, when I was growing up in the United States, the time that I spent down in the US, I remember seeing speed limits of 75 miles an hour. And then it went to 60 and then down to 55. Um, and Danny's talking about the fact that we used to have in this country Canada savings bonds. Canada savings bonds were eliminated by everyone's, your friend and mine, and I mean that sarcastically. Justin Trudeau got rid of Canada savings bonds. He'd rather, and that was the way that Canadians used to lend money to the government. The government would issue you a 10-year bond. It would give you a coupon rate, 3.5% or whatever it happened to be. And they were borrowing money from Canadians. And that would be referred to as sovereign debt, meaning it's held within the country. Now, all our when bonds are issued, for the most part, it's non-sovereign debt, and most of our debt is held by guess who? The Chinese, as opposed to Canadians lending money to the government, which was the case for. I believe that Canada Savings Bonds came out during World War II, or maybe even World War One, but I haven't read up on the history of that. Uh, And let's see what else is being written. Uh, Danny's saying that the speed limit on most of Highway 2 in Alberta is 110. The government is currently considering raising the limit to 120 on certain parts of Highway 2. In Ontario, the major highway, especially through the GTA, the 401 starts in right as soon as you cross from Quebec, and it runs all the way down to Windsor. And it's, I believe, the most traveled highway. The section through the GTA is the most traveled highway in the world, or at least in North America. And that's because Canada runs just east and west. And when you come to Toronto, you can't go south, and no one wants to go north. It's too cold. Everything is running east west. So 401 is an incredibly busy stretch of highway. But out in my rural area, about an hour and a half, about 150 kilometers, 100 miles from Toronto, they've raised the speed limit now to 110. and it's 110 until you get to about Bowmanville, I think, which to me is nominally it's the start. You're getting into the GTA once you get to Bowmanville. And anyway, uh, and Danny's writing that our healthcare system is not breaking. It has been broken for a long time, for years. And then Whale is saying, still on the speed limit, Montana highways used to have no speed limit. Sounds like the Autobahn in Germany. And I drove through Montana a long time ago, 1978. That was the year we moved back finally, permanently to Canada. But there, it seems rather convenient to me, or surreptitious, coincidental, stick whatever adjective on it you want. But the COVID era, 2020, came around just as boomers were, turning 75 or so. And what segment of the population was most impacted by COVID? I think it's beyond dispute, although I'm careful not to, I don't want to speak with any authority. I don't want to claim to have expert knowledge, but I do recall that Theresa Tam was quoted in the Washington Post as saying that 80% of Canada's death totals are coming from long-term care facilities, which is, and that's the old and sick and dying. And boomer is a bit of a generalistic term nowadays for anyone older. So even if someone is 85, they still tend to get affixed with the boomer label, even though they're not really of the boomer generation. The front end of the baby boom generation is only now just starting to turn 80. And this is a huge problem because the baby boom population has been called, again, by people who study demographics. One of the words they used or terms they used to describe them is the pig in the python. And if you picture a python swallowing a pig and you see this big bulge moving its way through the digestive tract of a large snake or a python, they're this mammoth bulge in the population. And we have that with the baby boom population. Even still, they represent about 1 in 4 Canadians are baby boomers. They are, they were, I believe, at one time they were damn near 50% of the population not too long ago. But immigration has skewed Canada's demographics greatly. If we hadn't had the wide open liberal style immigration, come on in, everybody, it would be worse. Immigration was absolutely vital for this country because of the baby boom generation. The baby boom generation, their parents sacrificed. The baby boomers didn't want to sacrifice. Gimme, 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 now, now, now. Just do it. The me generation, they were called. And here's something, interesting is the fact that the boomers, when they were growing up, when they were kids, the main publication, the biggest magazine in the United States and probably in Canada as well, Life magazine. Life magazine was it. Okay. It was on everyone's coffee table. Life magazine. It was called photojournalism. They would have big photos and stories to go with the photos. But they were kind of they introduced this idea of photojournalism. Newspapers back in the day, photos, look at old papers from the 1930s, 40s. There are not a lot of pictures, not a lot. And the front page might not have any. It'd all just be headlines. Didn't want to waste the space. But Life magazine introduced photojournalism. But that wasn't good enough for the boomers. Life encompasses everything. You don't get much bigger than life. That's everything alive. But 1970, sometime around in the early 70s, Life magazine as it had existed, died. It stopped publishing. And in 1974, what came out? People magazine. People is part of life, but it's not all of life. It's just one segment of life. This, narrow point of view. And then in just a few years later, People wasn't good enough. They came out with the magazine called Us. Us is part of people, but it's us people, not you people. We're the boomers, we're the yuppies, we're the me generation. It's all about us. And then in 1979, just a couple years. So you had People in 74, you had Us magazine, 1977. Then in 1979, Self, the me generation. And I was expecting that within another year or two, there'd be a new magazine called Me. I'm thrilled. Um, I I think it'll be a very positive thing when, I mean, we're looking at, another 40 odd years of the boomers being around. Because remember, the front end is turning 80 now. The back end is in there, or the back end is around 61, 62 years of age. I'm just behind them, just behind the boomers. I was a kid during much of this stuff. My teachers growing up were invariably boomers. Um, anyway, let's see what's being written on the chat and then I'll go on. I like this. Danny's writing, I didn't know this. He's saying that the Autobahn, the German superhighways, that they have a minimum speed limit of 80. And it's one thing I noticed driving through Quebec. I don't know if if they still have it. For a time though, they had maximum 100, minimum 60. And that's kind of neat. They're the only Canadian province I ever saw with a minimum speed limit. Like, if you're not going to go at least this fast, get off the road. And I'll tell you something, driving through Montreal on Metropolitan Boulevard, which I think has a 90-kilometer-hour speed limit. It's something of an overland expressway. And I was driving that in and around 1984, 1985. Went down with a buddy of mine to Montreal for March break. And we're driving on the Metropolitan Boulevard, 80, 90-kilometer-hour speed limit. I was doing 90, 100 and just getting clocked. Everyone was flying by me. And I think I heard 15 times, Maudit anglophone, Maudit ontarien. Maudit is French for damn. Damn English, you damn Ontario guy, go back. And I was like, I was in high school driving along this road in an old, if you remember the Honda Civics that looked like a jogging shoe, rust bucket, and I had never, and no GPS. We only had a map, and I was simply looking for an exit that said Rue Sainte Catherine or Dorchester. What I can't remember now, but there were two main drags that I knew in Montreal. I had been there, so I said, "We'll just get off on Sainte Catherine." And what I did not know is that Metropolitan Boulevard and Sainte Catherine run parallel to each other. So I never found the exit, and we drove right out of Montreal. Eventually, I saw a sign that said Verdun, and I went, "We're not in Montreal anymore." Long story. Anyway, and Danny's writing in all caps that it's time to shut the door on immigration. We need remigration. I don't know what exactly remigration is. Maybe you can tell me. Uh, Whale writes something interesting that his father just passed. Sorry to hear that, my friend. At 90. And when someone makes it, to 90, when they make it past 85, I like to say they're playing, you're playing on the house's money. I just had a guy come in, saw him at work within the last few days. He's a regular Fred, old guy, told me that he will soon, I think Saturday, will be celebrating his 96th birthday. And people do live, while anyone alive now can probably expect to live to be about 85, because again, the 82 or so life expectancy is life expectancy from birth. But if you get into your 20s, I think you can pretty much expect a lot of people are living into their late 80s, 90s, even we're seeing a lot of centurions out there. And this is a problem for the government in the primarily in what are called unfunded liabilities. The Canada Pension Plan is funded; they've got their billions of dollars under management, but OAS, old age security, that comes out of tax revenue, and the healthcare sector comes out of tax revenue, and so governments having an aging population is very expensive, especially when you have governments that are, you know, let's take a look at the Weston family. A number of years back, they got millions of dollars in subsidies to update their refrigeration plants or their refrigeration infrastructure because it was going to help global warming. And goodness knows the Weston family needs money. And you don't want to, what does the government, with sitting on all the, managing hundreds of billions of dollars, do they want to be spending that on dear Uncle Joe's diaper changes and his 15 prescription medications so that he can milk the CPP and the OAS system? Bit of a pejorative, open-ended question there. Do governments want Canadians living longer? Do they want us living into our 80s and 90s? Or would they prefer that we fade into that good night and that we stop draining the healthcare system, that we stop draining OAS, that we stop draining other, and it's not just, you've got the Ontario teachers pension plan, you have pension plans, the unfunded liability, I think for the federal government alone, actually federal and provincial combined, I was reading it's north of $4 trillion. That means ongoing expenses that are going to cost in and around $4 trillion. And when they get the CPP death benefit, talk about a poorly worded program, the CPP death benefit, money that's paid out when someone dies. And then all of a sudden, 2020, COVID comes along, disproportionately affecting the elderly population. And we have some very questionable treatment protocols when COVID came along. Like if you got the flu, a respiratory virus, you would go to the hospital, they would treat you. They had a treatment protocol for the flu. But for SARS-CoV-2, at the start in 2020, what did they say? They said that the treatment protocol was to go home and to call us if you have trouble breathing. No treatment. No treatment. So you have an elderly person, very sick, all the COVID symptoms that they told us about, which are basically very much like the flu symptoms. But if it's the flu, we'll treat you. But if it's COVID, sorry, there's nothing we can do. Go home. Call us if you can't breathe. If you're struggling for air, give us a call. That's something to ponder. The fact that no treatment, and everyone should know that in 2020, 2021, the flu vanished. No one got the flu anymore. Everyone had COVID. Anyone going in with flu-like symptoms, no, it's not the flu. Flu stopped existing, ostensibly. It fell off a cliff. 8,500, over 8,500 Canadians died 1 year from flu, and a year or two before 2020. It was 2018, 2019. StatsCan put the number of flu deaths at 8,511. I forget whether it was 2018 or 2019. But then all of a sudden, flu disappears. Everyone's dying of COVID, but the treatment protocol is no treatment. And then you have an individual like Dr. John Campbell, who many on this channel know and watch. He revealed that it became policy in Great Britain through an office called NICE, NICE. And I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but they're a division of the National Health Service, or what they call national health in Great Britain. And their protocol, when dealing with an elderly patient who was struggling to breathe because of COVID, the protocol was to prescribe midazolam, basically opiates and drugs that are in the opiate and the morphine families. One was called midazolam. And you put the two drugs together and it suppresses respiration. And in their official documentation, which Dr. John Campbell goes through on his channel, he went through the paper that was issued by this NHS division called NICE, and it said, do not be concerned that this combination of drugs will suppress respiration. So you have an elderly patient struggling to breathe, and their treatment protocol was a cocktail of drugs that would suppress respiration. I can't breathe. I'm having trouble breathing. Well, here, take these. It'll make breathing even more difficult. Check out Dr. Michael Yeadon and what he has to say about this. Dr. Michael Yeadon is a former chief science officer at Pfizer. He's also one of that company's vice presidents. So they would have, and I forget what, there would be the pediatric division of Pfizer, and they would have a chief science officer. They would have orphan diseases, and that would have a chief science officer. There's more than one chief science officer, and Michael Yeadon was one of them, and he was also a vice president. And he's been labeled by many as a quack. Yeah, this quack then left Pfizer. Pfizer closed his division and not wanting to move, not wanting to go elsewhere. He liked where he lived in England. So what he did is he started his own biotech. I forget the name of it, but I did read up on it some years ago. And that biotech was sold to Novartis for what Forbes magazine covered it. I read the article. They estimated the sale price to have been 1 billion US dollars. Michael, oh yeah, some quack who creates his own biotech that gets sold to Novartis for $1 billion. Yeah, but this is what's done. And I'm so sorry to hear this. Whale is talking about the fact that his dad, who he referenced earlier, recently passed away at 90, opted for MAID. Anyone who's not Canadian will know, most Canadians should be aware, but anyone who's not, and if you're not Canadian, you may not know, MAID stands for Medical Assistance in Dying. This is Dr. Kevorkian stuff. It's, and this adds to the fuel for what I'm suggesting as a possibility. I'm not saying definitively, because I think that will get me in trouble. But there are a lot of benefits to the boomer population fading to black in unfunded liabilities for the healthcare sector, for OAS, for countless other programs. And you look at all the money that's under management in the pension funds. What happens when people die is they stop collecting their pensions. So let me catch up a little on what's been said. Nancy was writing that, oh no, they now offer maid in hospice to elderlies, something they do not have all, yeah, people who don't have their cognitive function. I read, I was interested to know what is the health of someone living in long term care. And there's an organization called the Ontario Long Term Care Association and OLTC. They have a website that I read, and they gave a snapshot of their patient population. And I'm going off memory here, but as I recall, 90+% of the residents of Ontario long-term care facilities, based on their snapshot, which was from the year 2018 or 2019, so just before COVID, it was over 90% suffered some form of cognitive issue, dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that. I remember well, 86%, according to their study, 86% of residents needed extensive help with what are referred to in the insurance industry as the activities of daily living, or ADLs. So that would be bathing, feeding, toileting, getting dressed. 86% needed extensive help. It was somewhere in and around, it was right around 74, 75, 76. Right around 75% were suffering from cardiovascular and circulatory diseases, issues. And there was something like 50 or 60% were taking 10 or more prescription medications. You're talking about a very old, sick, and frail population, but every month they're getting their CPP, they're getting their OAS. If they have a private pension, they're getting that. You know, and they're accessing the public health care system if they're, in one degree or another. They're, frequent visits to hospital, frequent visits to the family doctor, all paid by a public health system, publicly funded. And, Doug Ford in Ontario, he's got his developer friends who he's got to look after. And now that he's given away Ontario Place to, one group, he's got bills to pay. They helped get him elected. They helped get him into office. He's got to pay. Well, I don't have the money. I got to pay. Our hospitals are bursting at the seams because we haven't kept up. We haven't funded them properly. We haven't expanded the system as they've been telling us for 30 years. We need to expand the healthcare system to get ready for when the baby boomers start crushing the healthcare system, and we didn't do it. Anyway, and for what it's worth, I have an extended family member as well who suffered a massive stroke. And after, well, I won't tell you after what, but I'm sure you can guess. And she was in her 80s, like 86, 87 years of age. She had been in amazing health during, COVID in 2020. She was walking the halls. She would walk probably, 3 or 4 kilometers a day. And she used to go outside, but now they restricted residents in her facility. She lived in a senior living facility, but she was in the independent wing, her own apartment, kitchen, the whole thing, just a scaled down apartment building. It was one of these places where they have levels of care. So she lived in the independent living wing. Then you would have an assisted living wing. And then after that, you would have like a nursing home wing. But she was in the independent living wing. And after her massive stroke, which devastated her, maid was the option because she didn't, the prospect of, how much would she be able to recover and how much longer would she have anyway? And she opted for it as well. And Anyway, Nancy is back because she was doing ground beef. She was making meatballs, but the ground beef isn't cold enough, kept sticking to her hands. Okay. Um, and then Danny's giving a link regarding something. I didn't follow the conversation, and Nancy's wishing condolences to Whale, as am I, as I'm sure everyone is. Losing a parent is tough no matter what age. Uh, and then Nancy's writing that it was midazolam. A lot of nurses came out with the truth of what happened in hospices. I use three terms: long-term care, nursing home, hospice. It's all basically the same thing. I think I've heard it referred to by people in the chat here, maybe you, Nancy, or Danny, or Whale, or someone has said it's heaven's waiting room. And sadly, that's true. When I was doing my previous videos on the fact that the the Food and Drug Administration in the United States is now acknowledging that the COVID vaccines have killed American children. And I talked about the fact in that video that death at any death is tragic, whether it's a 90-year-old, whether it's a kid. But I didn't get to, I kind of sidetracked and I never came back to a point I wanted to make. And that is that the death of a child is more tragic. I mean, when someone in their 90s living in a long-term care facility, you know, passes away when they cross the veil, when they go to their reward, it's sad, but it's nowhere in many cases it is a relief. When my grandmother, who was suffering from brain cancer, when she passed away, it was devastating hard, but it was also there was some comfort to be drawn from knowing that she was not suffering anymore, because she was suffering through much. Her last weeks, months were not pleasant. But when a child dies, that's exponentially worse. And so much of the rationale behind the COVID vaccines was, we're saving the life of vulnerable people. Well, who are the most vulnerable to COVID? Well, according to Teresa Tam, 80% of deaths were happening in long-term care facilities. So it was, 80, 90-year-olds. And now we have the Food and Drug Administration admitting that the COVID vaccines have been responsible for American children dying. And so the question I, was asking in that video, how many kids had to die so that some, you know, boomer or boomer type person could have a few extra months of diaper changes? And the boomer generation has been the most self-centered, egotistical. Yeah, and in a lot of ways, is it really their fault? No, no. The generation before them, you know, who had their hands on the levers of control, liberalized them. Here, you want to have sex whenever you want with no consequence? Here's a birth control pill. Go crazy. Free love. Free love. That was a big thing in the 60s, early 70s after the pill came out. Free love. Right? It was a big thing at Woodstock. Let's all just have sex. Don't have to worry about pregnancy anymore. We've got the birth control pill. And the most spoiled generation around. Now, they didn't spoil themselves. They were spoiled by the powers that be. Canada, we got Pierre Elliott Trudeau became the Prime Minister of Canada in 1968. So just as the boomers are starting to vote, he's like, deficit financing. Well, we don't have, in previous generations, it was a case of, well, we don't have the money. We went to war and now we need some austerity. We got to pay off the war debt. After World War I ended, Canadians started lying on their income tax. The income tax had just been introduced as a temporary measure to pay for the war debt. And Canadians of that generation lied on their tax returns. Did they lie to underreport their income? No. A lot of Canadians lied and overreported their income because you had to make a certain threshold in order to be subject to income tax. And Canadian form of virtue signaling, really, but Canadians wanted to do their part. They wanted to be able to say, "Oh, I had to pay $75 this year in income tax. I'm helping to pay down the war debt." And you think that would happen with the boomer generation, of which Donald J. Trump is a member? Incidentally, Mark Carney is not a boomer. He's about my age. He's Gen X. He's just behind. It's the first time I think we've had a Gen X leader, and I'm somewhat ashamed to say he's of my generation because I think he's more the living embodiment of the boomer generation. But what are you going to do? We're stuck with him for the next 4 years. But anyway, and then Danny, with respect to Michael Yeadon, has written that he is a blessing, and he is. I disagree with him on just one thing. Uh, with Dr. Michael Yeadon, and that is that Dr. Michael Yeadon has seemed to join the camp that many here agree with. So I'm not going to straw man it or anything, but there are many people who believe that viruses do not exist. And I don't have the medical background or qualifications to speak to this. But just as a layman, my reaction to this idea, oh, viruses don't exist, and even Dr. Michael Yeadon says that. Uh, I watched the video where he kind of and he said it was something of an epiphany, something of an aha moment, something of a realization that he only came to, within the last couple, 3, 4 years after COVID. Uh, he's come out publicly and said that he does not believe viruses per se, that they don't exist. And the difficulty I have with that is that when I was in kindergarten, when I was 5, not grade 5, kindergarten when I was 5, I got chickenpox, broke out in spots all over, everywhere. And then it went to other members of my family, other children in the family. Likewise, when COVID hit our household, and I assume it was COVID, February of 2022. It started on a Thursday night with my youngest, who at the time would have been, I think, 7 or 8. He spiked a fever, chills, complaining of a low-grade headache. He had dry, non-productive cough, all the classic symptoms. That was Thursday night. By Friday morning, he was right as rain. It was like a little bug that went through. But then Friday, it hit me. And I had all the same symptoms again, dry, non-productive cough, low-grade headache, low-grade fever, chills, aches and pains, shoulder joints and such. Um, and then, but for me, it lasted that night through Saturday. By Sunday, I was pretty much on the mend. It was like a 48-hour bug for me. And then my wife got it after me. So it went from one to the other to the other. And um, I something encountered our systems. And likewise, chicken pox, you get the spots, and I get the spots, and then my sibling gets the spots. Well, it's something. And that's why I have trouble with this idea that viruses are not real. But I probably haven't, investigated it sufficiently enough to fully understand that point of view, because I'm not suggesting that Michael Yeadon is crazy. The way that people tend to confront these arguments is they go, "Oh, he thinks viruses don't exist." That's a dumb way to do things. Um, and that's what I call straw manning. So let's see what's being said, and we'll wrap it up. But anyway, I mean, there's no real central theme to this other than the fact that boomers are entering the end of natural life. And there's almost an open question on my part as to whether or not, it's one of these areas I have to tread very carefully with. But are the powers that be upset to see boomers fading to black? And, we talk about things like midazolam, like the opiates and the morphines being prescribed. We talk about MAID being introduced into Canada, medical assistance in dying. People are talking about replacement, what do they call it? The replacement conspiracy, I guess. Um, Replacement theory, which I personally, I do believe it, but I do not think it is racially motivated. I don't think it's got anything to do with race. I don't think it's racial. I think it's more cultural. I think there is a look upon people living in the developed Western world who have grown up in the Western developed world, who are attached to the cultural values of the Western developed world. And that would include me. And we are seen as a problem. We consume too much. We're useless eaters, to use an expression that I believe was coined by Boris Johnson's father. Bunch of useless eaters. And wouldn't it be better rather than, we expect civil rights? We expect, our constitutional rights and freedoms, our charter rights and freedoms to be respected. Well, that's annoying because what happens is we all go down to Ottawa in February of 2022 and we start screaming when the government tries to take away our bodily autonomy and say, and says, if you want to buy and sell in the marketplace, if you want to participate in society, well, then you've got to comply and you've got to roll up your sleeve and do what we say. And we say, no, that contravenes my right to bodily autonomy. And using coercion to get me to take something that was rushed through at warp speed, well, wouldn't it be nice if you had a much more compliant population? And there are people in the world who look upon a country like Canada and they say, my gosh, they have running water, they have electricity, they have roads, they have paved roads. Well, I don't care about human rights. I don't care about constitutional freedoms. I don't care about bodily autonomy. Just give me clean water, give me roads, give me, public sanitation. I'm living in paradise. I don't care about bodily autonomy. I'm not culturally, I have not been culturally conditioned to have that expectation. I'm used to living under, authoritarian dictatorial rule. It's the way it's been in my country. So I'm living under dictatorial rule, and there's no sanitation, there's no running water. I got nothing. And so I don't think it's racially motivated. I think it's culturally motivated. I do believe replacement theory, I think is the name, is definitely a thing, but it's got nothing to do with pigmentation. My Christian faith informs me that, at that great throne judgment, every tribe, every language, every culture, we're all going to be there, irrespective of, what this earthly shell looks like. But the powers that be, and I talk on this station often about the World Economic Forum and how you have a confluence of major corporations, all the big pharmaceutical companies, all the big tech giants, all the Black Rocks, the big hedge funds. They're there, they're the money. Then you have academia, they're there as well. And academia is funded by the corporate sector. You know, you look at the Dalai Lama, look at Toronto School of Public Health. They have the Toronto University of Toronto, their public health school called the Dalai Lama School of Public Health. Where do they get their funding? Where does it come from? Pharmaceutical companies. Corporate sector funds all manner of studies, research in our ivory towers in academia. And then you have government. So you have this three-headed beast of corporate, government, and academia. And they're all coming together in places like the World Economic Forum, but that's not the only one. There's also the Bilderberger Group. There's also the Council on Foreign Relations. There's also Coconut Grove, Bohemian Grove, Club of Rome. They're all manner of these little organizations that are very much interconnected. And what they're doing is they are setting out, this is the manner, this is the way we want the world to move. This is the direction we want the world heading in. And they come together, they lay out their plans, and then they foist it on us, the great unwashed, and they have all the tools to impact the way we think. Now, I'll bring up one little bit before I wrap up. I mentioned on this station before how McDonald's Corporation was sued by a woman who got severe burns, I think third-degree burns on her thighs. She bought one of their coffees. McDonald's had a corporate, it was standard operating procedure for McDonald's to have their coffee at damn near the boiling point when it was sitting in the pot, incredibly hot. And when it spilled onto her thighs, this woman suffered horrific injuries. You can read about it. And you know, she won millions of dollars in her lawsuit, primarily for pain and suffering. And if you read into the details of it, you'll see that she suffered incredibly. Now, was it too much money? Look at the amount of money McDonald's makes. And I'm here to suggest something. When Seinfeld came out with their episode with Kramer spilling coffee, and he was going to sue the company that served him the coffee. Like, yeah, I don't know what the name was in the TV show, but he was going to sue them. And then a simple little Chinese balm had cured the small little rash that he had developed. And they created this impression in the zeitgeist that anyone going up and suing a major corporation, is McDonald's sitting in Davos, Switzerland every February when the World Economic Forum gets together? I don't know if they are, but I assume as much. I think they would be one of the players. And you've got media companies there as well. Do you think there's a desire to affect the way people think about things like lawsuits against major corporations? And Seinfeld was such a hugely popular show, hugely popular show. And they stuck with it. They stuck with it. It didn't catch on at first. Didn't catch on at first. Well, I just wonder. I talk about the fact on here, and I consider it a fact that the media is there to tell you what to think, what to believe, tell you how to feel about things. And I think a lot of people, when they look at that McDonald's lawsuit, they default to the programming that they got from a TV show like Seinfeld. And the same thing happened on that same show, massively popular late 80s into the 90s. I forget when their last episode ran, but we're talking 90s here. And where George went to see a naturopathic or homeopathic quote unquote doctor. And they portrayed the guy as a total nut bar lunatic quack. And this is called straw manning. Straw manning. I saw a guy during the early days of COVID there was an individual being interviewed by Bill Maher called Dr. David Katz. And Dr. David Katz graduated from Yale Medical School. He's a past president of the American Association of Lifestyle Medicine, or something very close to that. Lifestyle medicine is part of the organization's name. It's like the American Association of Lifestyle Medicine. Dr. David Katz, Katz or Z, and he was saying that there are five main drivers. This was what he was saying, not me. Five main drivers of determine whether you're healthy or not. And one you can't do anything about. It's your genetics. So your genetics, it's a lottery. You got what you got. But the other four are manageable to one degree or another. And the other four were get enough sleep, get enough exercise or sleep, exercise, diet, and the last one was manage stress. And what he was putting forward is that if you do those four things well, and if didn't lose the genetic lottery, that your health outcomes will be better. But in terms of the pharmaceutical industry, wouldn't it be better to have a stressed out, overweight, non-exercising, poor diet population? What's the new drug that's come out that's for losing weight? Because we have an epidemic of obesity in the Western world, certainly in the United States and in Canada as well. Diabetes rates are exploding. We're all eating highly processed foods. Anyway, let's read what's being written. See, I'm going to catch up on the last few anyway. I won't go too far back. All right. Nancy, okay, I read that. Then we're talking about Nancy's meatballs. Uh, and now Nancy's writing that some studies are showing that nicotine patches and or taking creatine daily can maybe. She writes down, thank you for this, not medical advice. Maybe she doesn't know. This is just something out in the ether that could this have an impact on dementia? It's something anyone watching this, if they're curious, look into nicotine patches, creatine, and maybe there's some studies out there. I don't know. And I mean that genuinely. I do not know. Uh, then Nancy goes on to say, my landlady now have blood clots in her lungs, and her doctor does not understand where they came from. Um, but she has an inkling as to why, just an inkling. Actually, the gentleman who was fixing my furnace today, and the reason I'm wearing this fleece that looks stupid. Um, anyway, he reluctantly he said he got them early and that he hadn't read enough and that he believes that he has experienced health issues as a result. Um, Danny's writing, and I know you mentioned this before. Danny said he started to use ALP nicotine pouches as a supplement for health, and he's showing a video by someone called Dr. Brian, spelled with a Y, Ardis, Ardis, and he has the link up if you want to look into that. And then Wales commenting that Dr. Ardis's video on slew beaters, on Stu Peters' show. Stu Peters, and I can't remember the name of Stu Peters' old video podcast, his channel. He's a big name. And Danny's saying he has a pouch in now. And we're reading. And the problem is I scroll down and then I go too far. And Wales saying that he wrote Slew Peters because he's trying not to trying to prevent the Big Brother is always watching, but I step over that line all the time. Man did that video talking about for the first time, the US FDA will acknowledge that COVID-19 vaccines have killed American children. And that's their words. That's the word right out of the email. As I read it, the British Medical Journal did a piece on it. And that was the quote they had from the email. And I'm told, or I've heard, that using the word killed on YouTube, that throttles you, that causes your content to be de-amplified. That does not boost you on the algorithms. It's supposed to say unalived instead of killed, but I hate censoring myself. Uh, and then uh, Danny's writing that they told us we get tetanus from rusty objects, Uh, yet we do not. Tetanus lives in soil, dust, and manure. Anything can cut you and let that bacteria in. It does not have to be rusty. Yeah, that's the idea. You step on a rusty nail. And I had one. Last time I got a tetanus shot would have been probably 2010. That's the last time I had any shot. I'm done. Yes, not medical advice. I'm just speaking about myself. I am now unapologetically an anti-vaxxer. Deal with it. Uh, Danny is writing now that Carney said, this is Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, Muslim, oh yes, I saw that. Muslim, this is this post-nationalistic world that Justin Trudeau liked to talk about as well, is whatever your values are, they are Canadians' values because Canadian values don't exist. So Muslim values are Canadian values. And Danny is going on to say that no, they are not. It is not, Islam is not compatible with our way of life or values, period. Amen, brother. No argument for me whatsoever. Islam is the human rights that we enjoy in this country. Show me the same level of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedoms that we have in the Western world. Show me them in an Islamic country. Show them to me. Saudi Arabia, show me. Iran, Iraq, come on. Anyway, and Wales saying that I'm getting into systems of law, contract law versus natural law. Okay. Um, and then Danny is writing, forgive the way it's going to come out, but white people have one or two kids, maybe uh, have three or four and five kids. Yes. Um, but that's a cultural thing. That is a cultural thing. And if you talk to people from different countries, when they come over here, the first generation has a large family, but the kids they have adopt the Canadian perspective. And the children have one or two or none. So it's not racial. It's got nothing to do with pigmentation. It has to do with cultural values. Uh, and then Denny's writing that 300 companies or so uh, that they run the world. Well, yeah, what they do is that's why we have WEF, Bilderbergers, Club of Rome, Coconut Grove, Council on Foreign Relations. That's why we have these groups that spend huge amounts of money lobbying the political class so that they can get what they want. The pharmaceutical industry in the United States is one of, if not the largest lobbying group in the United States. Money talks. Money talks. And the political class, you're going to pay to, get me reelected. Or if I go against you, you're going to fund a campaign that's going to trash me. I like my job. I like making hundreds of $1,000s a year. I love having lobbyists, you know, giving me things, money talks. Nancy's talking about what a lot of people are talking about, Sing Horton. Uh, because I live out in the boonies, Everything, if I lived in Toronto, Toronto is very much as cosmopolitan a place as there is in the entire world. I mean, there's no one single majority group. It's been many years ago, what I'll call the European descended, white Canadians now make many years ago, they became the largest single minority, but there is no majority population in Toronto. And that probably includes the entire greater Toronto area as well. Uh, and Danny's writing that it's a common misconception. People think that McDonald's is in the business of selling burgers. Uh, and Danny's saying that their actual business is really real estate. And then he says, believe it or not. And then Nancy's saying something about Kramer. Uh, and Danny is saying, in his opinion, the best episode of Seinfeld was Soup Nazi, Magic Loogie, or Master of Your Domain. I saw all three of those. So the Magic Loogie episode with Keith Hernandez, former first baseman for the New York Mets. That was playing on the JFK assassination, and it was probably came out in and around the same time that the JFK movie came out. And the JFK movie was somewhat explosive. And then you have Seinfeld in a fashion kind of mocking it, the magic loogie. And I wondered to what degree, I hadn't thought of that before, but was that just an effort to try and steer people away and make light of an incredibly serious documentary style film by Oliver Stone, JFK, that seriously called into question the official narrative that JFK was killed by a lone assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, sitting up in a book depository with a bolt action, I think an Italian made rifle, inaccurate as hell, and that he was able to hit a moving target. Yeah. We're not talking about a guy with a tripod and everything else. A guy with this bolt action old Italian rifle is able to hit a moving target, and that's the official narrative. And I don't think the RFK or the JFK documentary by Oliver Stone kind of pointed in directions, but I don't think we ever get a definitive answer. The only thing I can say that I believe with 100% certainty is that the lone gunman story, I believe, is a total crock. And I've said before, I've talked about a JFK before on this station. I've talked about it in videos before. For me, the smoking gun proof that it was a conspiracy, that Lee Harvey Oswald was not he was not acting alone, is the fact that not long before he was shot by Jack Ruby, Lee Harvey Oswald told the world, he said, "I'm just the patsy, I'm just the fall guy, I'm just the one they're pinning it on." Well, if there's a patsy, that means there's a criminal conspiracy, and so and the fact that Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner with ties to the mafia, puts a bullet in the prime suspect's gut and kills them, opens up I think there are a number of different reasons why JFK was taken out. I think, one, he wouldn't commit to Vietnam. I think two, he wouldn't commit to retaking Cuba. He wasn't all in on overthrowing Fidel Castro. I think he gave a speech about secret societies like the Freemasons and how they are, anathema to a free and democratic society. I think there are not, the mafia, I think, had it out for him because Joe Kennedy, JFK's father, had engaged with um, the union movement, which was tied in heavily with organized crime, to help JFK get elected. And then JFK, his administration, turned their guns on organized crime and were hitting them hard. And it's like, hey, we helped get you elected. I think there was a convergence of reasons why JFK was taken down. Uh, and then Whale is mentioning a book, and it's called Committee of 300 Conspirators Hierarchy, the author named John Coleman. And Danny seems to have read it. He's writing Amen, a must read. Uh, Danny says that what he loves about his generation's comedy, which my generation as well, is they had very little filter. They made fun of stuff. Cancel culture has ended good comedy. Not going to argue the point. You and I both love George Carlin. Uh, and then Danny saying that we'll never have another Richard Pryor, Sam Kinison, Eddie Murphy, Dennis Leary, George Carlin, Andrew Dice. I never was a fan of Andrew Dice Clay at all. Now, Carlin, huge. Sam Kinison, didn't like him, liked him, didn't like him. It's weird. Sam Kinison, one of my favorite little bits is Sam Kinison came on to the Tonight Show, and watch this if you can find it. So it's available. It's on YouTube. And he came on the Tonight Show, and he actually sang. I got to end this off because I've been going on an hour and a half. But Sam Kinison came on the Tonight Show. He sang, and he sang wonderfully, better than you would expect. And he sang "Are You Lonesome Tonight" by Elvis Presley. And in a very serious fashion, he had three backup singers. Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight? Are you sorry we drifted apart? Does your memory stray to a warm summer's day when I kissed you and called you sweetheart? Do the chairs in the parlor seem empty and bare? Do you gaze at your doorstep and picture me there? Is your heart filled with pain? Shall I come back again? Tell me, dear, are you lonesome tonight? And then, if you know the original, Elvis Presley does a voiceover, and Sam Kinison does a voiceover, and he goes, I want to know, are you lonesome tonight? I want to know a lot of things. Like, are you human? Do you know what you did? You ripped my heart out. You said, oh, we need to break up. I'm not growing. Have you grown any? Are you any taller? You know what you did? You destroyed me. You tramp. And he does his normal Sam Kinison bit. And you're just in shock. And then after he finishes that, then he goes back in to the song and wraps it up. And then, even as good as that performance, he sits down with Carson, and Carson says, you have a really good voice. You sound like a young Presley. Da, da, da. And Sam Kinison says, I used to sing in church. And Carson said, no, I heard this. I heard that you used to be a preacher. Sam Kinison goes, yeah, I used to preach when I was a kid. My parents were preachers. They would have me sing in church, and you were preacher. And he goes, yes, I used to be a preacher. I know I'd heard this. And Sam Kinison goes, yeah, I know. It sounds crazy. Like, what were you before that, Sam? President of your own country? But no, he said, I used to preach. And then after getting divorced, he got out of ministry and went into comedy. And I bring this up because Sam Kinison died in an accident. I believe his car was hit by a drunk driver. And if you look at the story of what happened, he was laying on the ground and he sat up and apparently had a conversation with someone who wasn't there and just said, okay, I understand. And he lay down and died. And it just, Sam Kinison was a fundamentalist Pentecostal preacher. And then he went 180 degrees. And I wonder, was he having a conversation with something not of this world when he crossed the veil? Anyway, uh, so Nancy saying that Sarah Silverman was hilarious and she was canceled. And Danny saying the reason why Kinnison and Dice went up is they could say what they wanted to say, period. They had no filter. Well, during the interview with Kinnison and Johnny Carson, Sam Kinnison said something to the effect that everyone now, he pushed the envelope and then, now it became a game to see who could be more offensive. I would invite you to check out a comedian on YouTube called Tim Hawkins. And he bills himself as a Christian comedian. And check him out. Tell me what you think. I think he's hilarious. He's also incredibly musical, incredibly musical. And he doesn't do religious comedy much in the sense that he does some, but he says he's a comedian who is a Christian. And a comedian's job is to make you laugh. So he doesn't swear, but and he mocks religion on occasion. So check him out and tell me what you think. Uh, and I agree, Whale. I won't read it. God bless. Anyway, an hour and 36. Whale made a comment to me on one of my streams saying, got to get the younger set involved on my live stream. Tune in tomorrow. I've got a guest if things go well. I may have someone sitting beside me. I think he's only been on the stream once or twice, and it's been just he handed me Max one just recently. And what we're planning to talk about tomorrow is The Chosen, because we have both watched right up to the last season that's available, season 6. So we're going to be talking about our favorite scenes. So if you're, maybe that'll draw in some younger eyes. Anyway, at any rate, enjoyed the conversation as I always do. The boomer generation, they're dying off. And I wonder, and I'll end it by saying, are they greasing the skids? I'm going to be dying anyway, but are they greasing the skids? I'll just leave it that way. And I'll end off with my usual. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord God Almighty make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord, creator of all things, may he grant you peace in this crazy upside down world. We'll see y'all hopefully tomorrow night. And we'll see if things go off. It'll have to be a little earlier because somebody has a bedtime. Someone has school in the morning. Although it's looking with the snow that we're getting right now, that school will be canceled. So good night, all. Nancy, Danny. Well, I think that's everyone who commented. I know at the beginning we had John 5. I don't know if he stuck around to the end, but I know this particular episode was all over the place. But if you liked it, like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. We'll talk to you all. Bonne nuit tout le monde. On va vous voir demain, j'espère. Salut. Bye bye.